Imagine a world where the forests whisper secrets of warriors who never bow, where drums of defiance echo through misty hills. A world where a people, fierce and untamed, dared to stand against the greatest empire the world had ever known. Could the Celts, with nothing but courage and cunning, defy the empire that ruled the world? In the rolling hills and shadowed forests of ancient Europe, a people lived untamed, free in spirit, guided by the rhythms of the earth rather than the strict laws of men. They were the Celts. Their lives were woven with courage, their stories etched in song, and their spirits fueled by a wild freedom that no empire could easily bend. Unlike the citizens of Rome, who moved in perfect formation under the banners of an unstoppable war machine, the Celts lived as individuals and clans, each with its own customs, its own heroes, its own heartbeat. Yet this very independence, this fierce love of liberty, was both their greatest strength and their gravest challenge. Rome, on the other hand, was the embodiment of order. Its legions marched with precision, every soldier a cog in a vast engine of conquest. Roads were laid with purpose, cities built with permanence, and laws enforced with relentless authority. Rome did not merely fight, it absorbed, disciplined, and reorganized every challenge into something manageable, something conquerable. It was the weight of inevitability, the steel hand that would shape the world in its image. Against such a force, the fragmented clans of the Celts seemed like scattered leaves before a storm. And yet, it was precisely their chaos, their unpredictability that made the Celts so dangerous. In dense forests, on misty hillsides, and along the winding rivers, they struck with a ferocity that Roman commanders could neither anticipate nor contain. Ambushes erupted like lightning from the trees, swift and precise, leaving the disciplined legions scrambling. Where Rome relied on formations and standardized tactics, the Celts relied on instinct, on intimate knowledge of the land, and on the fire in their hearts. They were warriors, yes, but also poets, craftsmen, and mystics, bound together by a code that celebrated honor and valor above all else. History often reduces their story to a simple narrative of defeat, but such a reading ignores the profound truth. The Celts tested the might of Rome in ways few could. They resisted, delayed, and humiliated one of the most powerful machines the world had ever known. Every skirmish, every raid, every fleeting victory against the empire was a testament to their resilience. Their battlefields were not always grand. Sometimes they were hidden in the folds of valleys, where a band of warriors could turn the tides of a campaign with nothing but courage and cunning. And for Rome, these encounters were a bitter reminder that power alone could not crush the human spirit. It is here, in this meeting of two worlds, the disciplined, relentless empire and the wild, untamable Celts, that we glimpse something extraordinary. Not the certainty of conquest, but the beauty of defiance. Not the inevitability of history, but the stubborn persistence of freedom. The Celts were more than warriors. They were symbols of a truth that no empire, no matter how vast, could ever erase. That some hearts cannot be conquered, some spirits cannot be chained. And so in every forest shadow, in every echoing drumbeat, in every story passed from one generation to the next, the clash of order and freedom of machine and human spirit lives on. The Celts and Rome, two forces moving toward collision, teach us that history is not merely written by the victors. It is also carved by those who refuse to surrender. And in that refusal, in that untamed, unyielding defiance, the soul of the Celts endures wild, vibrant, and eternal. The Celts did not merely resist Rome. They struck at it with a fury that shook the very foundations of the empire. From the rolling plains of Gaul to the mist-covered forests of Britannia, their defiance was as relentless as it was bold. One cannot speak of this struggle without recalling the name Vercingetorix, a leader who rose not from birthright, but from sheer courage and the will to unite clans that often fought among themselves. Against him, Rome deployed legions, its soldiers disciplined and drilled in tactics honed over centuries. Yet Vercingetorix, with his knowledge of the land, his understanding of his people, and his audacious strategies, forced Rome to adapt, to innovate, and at times to bleed. In the siege of Alesia, the empire met the unyielding spirit of the Celts head-on, and for a fleeting moment, the unstoppable seemed vulnerable. Then there was Boudica, queen of the Icene, whose wrath rose like a storm upon the cities of Britannia. Betrayed by Rome's cruelty, she ignited a rebellion that swept through settlements with fire and vengeance. Her warriors, though lacking the formation and armor of Roman legions, possessed a ferocity and an intimate understanding of their terrain that allowed them to challenge an empire with nothing but raw willpower and righteous fury. Rome had conquered nations, but it had not conquered hearts, and the battle for the soul of Britannia was proof of this. The clash between Celts and Romans was not just fought on the battlefield. It was fought in every mind that dared to dream of freedom. Each ambush, each uprising, each stand against the advancing legions was a message. Strength alone does not guarantee submission, and might does not always command loyalty. The Celts were reminders to Rome that courage could delay, frustrate, and at times even equalize power. Every clash etched a story of resistance into the annals of history, leaving scars on both conquerors and the conquered alike. It is easy to look back and see Rome as inevitable, the empire destined to stretch its influence from the deserts of Africa to the hills of Gaul. Yet history is never inevitable. Every revolt, every battle where the Celts forced Roman generals to hesitate, to rethink their plans, to bleed, is a testament to the extraordinary impact of those who refused to bow. They were not conquerors, but they were catalysts. Forces that reminded the world that empires, no matter how vast, are challenged by the courage of the few. And even in defeat, the echoes of their resistance were profound. The stories of Vercingetorix and Boudica did not vanish with the smoke of battle. They lived on in the hearts of their people, in the whispered tales of villagers, in the songs that carried the memory of defiance across generations. They forced Rome to recognize that even an empire that ruled the known world could be unsettled, could be tested, could be forced to reckon with the indomitable spirit of those who refused to kneel. In the end, the struggle of the Celts against Rome was more than a military contest. It was a confrontation of ideals, discipline versus freedom, order versus instinct, empire versus the individual. And though the legions marched on, the legacy of these battles endured. For history does not belong only to those who conquer, it belongs also to those who, for a fleeting moment, dared to challenge the unstoppable, dared to roar against the machine, and dared to live and die unbowed. And yet, even as the Roman legions marched triumphantly across Celtic lands, it would be a mistake to say that the Celts vanished. They were not erased. They survived in ways that no sword could sever and no empire could suppress. Their towns may have fallen, their warriors may have perished, but the spirit of the Celts endured, woven into the land, into the stories, into the very soul of Europe. Their myths, their songs, their art, and their traditions persisted, a living testament to the power of defiance, of culture, and of identity. In every river that wound through misty valleys, in every sacred grove where the trees whispered secrets of old, the memory of the Celts lived on. History has a way of glorifying the victors, of etching their triumphs into marble and ink. Rome wrote the maps, built the roads, and stamped the coins. Yet culture is stubborn, and the Celts proved that ideas, values, and a way of life cannot always be conquered. Their resistance, their courage, and their unyielding love for freedom shaped not just the land they inhabited, but the future of the continent itself. In the stories of knights and druids, in the legends of heroes and gods, the Celtic soul traveled through time, inspiring those who would later seek liberty in the face of overwhelming odds. The legacy of the Celts is a lesson in endurance. It reminds us that even in the shadow of a world-conquering empire, the human spirit can persist. It teaches us that power, no matter how absolute, cannot claim dominion over dreams, over courage, over defiant, heartbeat of a people. The Roman Empire may have ruled the known world, but it did not conquer the essence of the Celts. And in that truth lies something extraordinary. For in the clash between empire and freedom, it is not always the one who wields the sword that leaves the deepest mark. It is often those who refuse to surrender. So when we look back across the centuries, when we trace the scars of conquest and the echoes of rebellion, we see the Celts not as victims of history, but as architects of resilience. Their defiance shaped the character of nations, inspired generations, and reminded the world that even in the face of the greatest power, the heart of freedom cannot be extinguished. And perhaps that is the greatest victory of all, the knowledge that, though empires rise and fall, the spirit of a people, unbowed and untamed, endures forever.